Hello, everyone, and welcome to ATB Community Spotlight, where we dive into stories that make our community vibrant and shining a light on the people organizations that make a difference. We're thrilled and thanks to ATB Wealth as our sponsor, supporting our goal of connecting and celebrating community. I'm Rob Capello. I'm joined by Michelle Dickie. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you.
Michelle is the Executive Director from Kelowna Women's Shelter. And we were chatting before about your first almost, year anniversary? As Executive Director?
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to have cake next time.
Yes, please.
Celebrate. So how long have you been, Michelle, I know we're talking about, so how long have you been with Women's Shelter before your role as Executive Director?
Yeah, so I started with the Kelowna Women's Shelter in February of 2022 as Director of Programs and Services. And then moved into the Executive Director role, again, mid-December.
Yeah.
But my work in the Central Okanagan has been my whole career in terms of families, children, and really kind of getting into what the needs of the community are.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you were in the were you in the nonprofit sector before you joined?
For more years than I care to.
Okay. We won't ask. Fair enough. We won't ask.
Yeah. My whole career has been spent, primarily in the not-for-profit and social services sectors.
Wow, interesting. So I mean, I think most people have probably heard the Kelowna Women's Shelter. I think most people have heard, but maybe they don't understand or know like your guys' mission and how you support communities. Maybe we should start there. In the elevator speech of so how do you support women in the community and children, I know, and just what's your role, sort of mission from a community perspective?
Yeah, I think there's twofold. There's providing services into the community for people that have been and children impacted by domestic abuse, but the other one is like creating conversations like this. We really need to make sure that we start moving the conversation about domestic abuse from that, that personal into the community.
Right.
And so essentially we're here to support anybody. And a lot of people think that we are only there to support people that have been impacted by domestic abuse, but we do have our 24-hour line.
Right.
We do community presentations for people that want to learn more and understand more and reach out in terms of their own knowledge, but also how to support maybe who's in their life.
And it's one thing that I would, really, I do feel fortunate working a couple of years ago with your team and doing some, work when it comes to campaign development, really understanding. And one thing that really was a light bulb moment for me is you hear domestic abuse and you think of physical abuse. And what came really like light bulb for me was like a lot of it is mental abuse. Like physical is a small portion of what you think about that, and that really was like, and it could, and it the discussion around it literally could be anybody. It could be your sister, your coworker, the person that where you grab your coffee in the morning, and it really was like, whoa, like made me really think differently about this discussion.
Yeah, it's really, people can sometimes have this idea of what domestic abuse looks like, or the person that is vulnerable, if you will, to domestic abuse, but it transcends every gender, every socioeconomic status, any family makeup, and it really could be the person that's sitting next to you, the person that you're working with. It could be your children's teacher, and you have no idea.
No.
Because like you said, we don't, like the physical abuse is actually not the most common. What we're seeing a lot of now is financial abuse, psychological, emotional, and then actually one that's kind of not talked about as much is post-separation abuse. And so sometimes what people will say is, oh, thank God they left, kind of thing. Finally, they're safe. Abuse doesn't end when they're able to step out of that situation. Right.
It's still there. One, and I think I was saying to where it's like a lot of it, you don't see it, right? Like it, and that was interesting. Like where I think before we jumped on about talking about how we need to make this a community conversation, right? And I think that was the important. And it's sometimes not a conversation people want to have, but we have to have it.
We do.
Right? So,
We do.
yeah, so you have to have those uncomfortable conversations sometimes. But yeah, so it's interesting. So that was a real eye opener for me. So I'm hoping that people get even just a tidbit out of that, of saying it's not always seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always seen. So, so let's maybe dive into a little bit about how you support the people that are going through this. So what range of services and programs, and we'll dive into each of the ones, but from a high level, what are some of the programs or services you offer the community when it comes to abuse, and mostly around women and children that we're working with.
So we've been around since 1980.
Yeah.
We started with one transition house, which we still have.
Yeah.
So we have in the Kelowna location, we have 8 beds and as many children.
Yeah.
We have some exciting times.
I imagine.
And so that is for women and children that are more in that crisis, fleeing domestic abuse. And everything is at no cost. We have everything they could imagine. If they have specific dietary or cultural needs, then we'll try our best to make sure that we provide those as well, which is also very important.
Yeah.
Pet friendly too.
Well, that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of people may not leave because they don't want to leave.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And so we also have our PEACE program. So that's for children ages 3 to 18. And it's amazing because what they do is they tailor the program specifically to that child's unique needs and interests. It's not this cookie cutter type of program.
Okay.
And then we have our outreach, and this is fairly new. We redeveloped it this year.
Okay.
And so our outreach team, they go out into the community and they can support even when that person is still in the abusive environment, because they can help support them in exit planning, connecting them to the different resources like financial, legal, to help support them, and I always say this in quotes, safely leave as possible. And we also, too, is it can take, on average, someone up to 6 or 7 times to be able to leave kind of in a way that is as safe or in a way that they can sustain that away. And so that program really builds that support and connection, because one of the things we don't want to do is let people leave thinking that they're not respected and valued and believed and heard and judged if they have to go back to that abusive situation.
Right.
So that's community outreach.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, I just want to ask you questions around different programs. So the PEACE program was one that I thought was interesting. And can you, I'm curious about, what's the objective that you try to, when you're working with youth, and it's all different, it's up to 18 years old? Is that?
3 to 18.
3 to 18. So what's the goal there? What's the objective, and how do you work with these kids? Because are they kids that are usually youth that are they the ones that are part of are they being abused, or are they ones that are in a relationship of a son or daughter of being abused, or both?
Yeah, it could be both.
Okay.
We're very careful.
Yeah, for sure.
So they do individual sessions, about 10 to 12 weeks.
Okay.
And then we also have group sessions. Part of the group sessions is that a lot of times children feel like they're the only one going through.
Right, what they're going through,
So obviously very carefully, but it's sharing those experiences and listening to other children and what their strategies are. We'll do safety planning for the children too, in terms of school or visitation.
And is there times where the children feel like they're the reason? There's abuse happening in the household because of something they might have done? Yeah,
I mean, children, no matter what, typically love their parents.
Right.
Whatever
that for sure.
That looks
for sure.
like.
Yeah.
And it's confusing for them.
Yeah.
So sometimes if they do something and then there's a response, they do feel like it's their fault.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the pieces that we can work through in terms of, you know, even emotional regulation, coping strategies, self-confidence, communication.
Right. Interesting.
And we even work with siblings because sometimes there's sibling tension.
Right.
Right, because of what's happening. So
well, it's good to know, like you said, like the group, like when you do group sessions or programs, is that to know that they're not alone. Yeah. They're not the only ones that are going through something like this, right? So, you mentioned a 24/7 hotline. Sorry. So, what kind of support can people get? Like, and what can they expect? Like when they're reaching out?
Yeah. So our 24/7 line, we've just actually changed it. It used to be just a phone line.
Okay. Yeah.
But we know that sometimes making that phone call and talking to somebody can be really scary, overwhelming.
100%, yeah.
So we've now included a text line.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Is that fairly new?
Yes, about a year, maybe a year.
Okay.
And so we have our support phone line, our text line, and email as well. So really trying to make sure we're providing opportunity.
Different ways that people can reach out.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them to do it.
Yeah. And it's not just for people that are impacted by domestic abuse. It could be, we get phone calls, you know, from family members. We get calls like from people like, I see this on the street. What do I do?
Right. Okay.
A concern about a friend or a colleague, and we can do safety planning, exit planning, community resources, intakes into the transition house, if need be as well. So it's kind of that, what do I do? Who do I call? What are my next steps? Or how do I support? And we can help.
Excellent. Of that. So the other program I wanted to chat a little bit about was a second stage housing program. Yeah. Because how does that help women that are children to transition? Because what you're doing is trying to transition back to independent living or transition to independent living. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. So the second stage program includes housing.
Okay.
So it's not a housing program.
Okay.
Just to make that very clear.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. But so it is a program where women and children can move into, and we have 32 units over in West Kelowna.
Okay.
And anywhere from 1 to 4 bedrooms. Okay. We are typically about 96 to 98% full most of the time.
Yeah.
And it is a program, so we'll support with employment, we'll support with financial literacy, health and wellness strategies, recreation. Really, it's taking a look at what that, and for that program, it is women. Okay. For women to identify kind of what are their next steps. What does that look like for them? Breaking it down into, manageable chunks, right, of things that they can take action on. Because one of the worst things we can do is set these high, lofty goals.
Right.
And then it falls apart, and then they feel like they failed.
Yeah.
No, we're going to break it down. We're going to celebrate each success. Fair enough. And we'll partner with other communities. So we just finished a pilot project with Work BC. So Work BC has a LEADS program specifically designed for women that have been impacted by domestic abuse. And we had 9 women come through and complete the program, and with 100% completion rate.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's amazing because it works really on that self-esteem, that self-confidence, identifying your strengths, and where do you want to go towards employment, because that is a step.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, and you kind of touched on already, that if with these, when you're working, like you mentioned, financial literacy, getting back into workforce and stuff, so you work with other community groups with that, or do you guys manage most of that in-house, or is it a little bit of both?
I would say it's a little bit of both, but we don't want to do what somebody else is doing.
Yeah, already. Yeah.
So if it's happening in the community, then we're going to try and make sure that we partner. Okay. Because that's not what we do. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And also too, when you're partnering with other organizations, you are really building that tool and that connection for the women into the community. Yeah. Because it makes it easier when they're transitioning out. They're already connected to the community. They're already connected to supports.
Right. Interesting. So how far reaching are you from an like an organization point of view? It's probably a good question because you mentioned you have Kelowna, West Kelowna, but are you working with like people in Penticton, Vernon? Like how far reaching are you?
So our catchment, if you will, is Oyamada Peachland.
Okay.
With that being said, we do work with other organizations outside the community or province. Sometimes people need to leave for safety reasons.
For sure. Okay.
And so we'll coordinate and make sure they one, we can help
right
the other way, because they can't stay in the community that they're in due to risk.
And vice versa.
Yes.
People hear that. Interesting. So I know you mentioned before, and it was funny because I'm like, I searched it and it said October. So Domestic Awareness Month. I think, is that have that right? Is that what it's called?
Yep, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Yep.
And I'm like, I looked up, it says October. You're like, well, in Canada, it's November. So can we speak a little bit about it? Is there things that you guys do differently during those months to get that awareness up, or is there anything that we can do from a public perspective to help? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Domestic Violence Awareness Month is this.
Right.
Okay. It is bringing awareness to the issue of domestic. I'm going to use the domestic violence language now.
Yeah.
Domestic violence. The very high percentage of people that experience and are impacted by creating those conversations. So what we did is on November 1st, we did a panel in West Kelowna, and it was Stronger Together. And so we had panel members speak about either their research, their experience working in the sector, lived experience. It was great. It was our first step in.
Right.
But I would think really what came to light is people are interested. People want to know and learn and understand, because I haven't talked to anybody that hasn't known somebody. That needs support or they had questions about.
Right. So given that, then how can us, the public, right? How can we support this? I get, there's things like donations and volunteering. I get that, and we can talk about that. But how can we help make sure that we break the stigma? We make it okay to have these discussions. Like what are some things that we can do? Other than donate, everyone should donate and help, volunteer, sure, right? Because you need funds, and that's the reality. You need dollars in order to have these programs. Like it's, I know you get government funding, I'm sure, but that's probably less and less, right? And there's lots of community groups that are probably asking for those dollars, right? So that's we do ask, the community when you can, if you can volunteer or donate. But what are other ways that we can help?
I think we've gotten a lot more invitations to speak about domestic abuse, what it looks like, how to handle disclosures, and not only community, but businesses as well. And what that does is it creates those conversations and helps support people question maybe what their belief or understanding of domestic abuse is. Because there are myths out there.
For sure.
And if we continue with those myths, what we're doing is we're setting people up that are impacted by domestic abuse, having difficulty to take that really brave step to talk to somebody.
Right.
And challenging each other, right? Watching what kind of language we use. There's, I'm going to go really stereotype here, but there's the old locker room talk, if you will, right? And it's like, they wouldn't shut up, so I just cuffed them upside the head. Well, it's not really funny.
No, right?
Because there might be somebody in that room who does that, and by saying it, you've just now normalized it, and them thinking that, I'm doing, it's fine. So
fair enough. Interesting. Is there a misconception or a stigma that if you're like we want to clear up today? Is there one that like you're like, if I could just clear one up, this would be the one I'd want to do? Or is there anything that comes to mind?
I think the biggest questions sometimes we get is, why didn't they leave? And second to that is, they're not keeping their children safe. So there's a couple things with that. Yeah. One is they are doing everything they can to keep themselves and their child safe the best way that they can.
Yeah.
We can't judge on what they're going through, what they know, and also too, highest risk of femicide after leaving. So it doesn't end, like I was saying earlier.
It's just not that easy.
No.
But yeah.
And there's a video and a story, and it was a mom, and so I'm just going to jump back for a second. Cycle of abuse. So we've got the honeymoon period, the tension, and explosive.
Okay.
Honeymoon, don't like that word. Entrapment, because they're not only entrapping the person, but they're also entrapping their friends, their colleagues. So if this person does step forward, it's like, really seemed like such a nice person.
Right.
Okay. But what can happen is then they move into this tension phase. And that's like the walking on eggshells.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it can last 2 minutes, and it can last a very long time. But if there's children involved, what we've heard is that the person will, for example, like, hey, let's go for a sleepover at grandma's. And they'll push in that tension phase. So it's explosive. So it happens when the children are not in the home. So it's just one example of how they're trying to navigate a very, very difficult situation. So those are a couple pieces that I would touch on. Is don't make assumptions and judgment of why didn't they leave and they're not keeping their children safe. We need to create an environment where it's okay to ask for help, that it's not the person that's getting abused is to blame. It is the person that is abusing that is responsible and shouldn't be doing it. So that'd be my one.
Interesting. So looking ahead, we're almost in 2025. What are some of the goals? What's, what from your perspective, you've been in a role, you said about a year now, and it's probably was drinking from a fire hose when you started learning, right? Like, so, but now that you've kind of gone through almost a full 12 months, like what's some of the goals and visions for Kelowna Women's Shelter for you in the new year?
Yeah, great question. We are just in the middle of strategic planning right now.
Oh, love it.
You can catch me in like 2 months. I might have a better response.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I think what I can say is that we're really taking a look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, what are the needs of the community. We want to partner with, other organizations in the community. We don't want to duplicate services. We want to collaborate because we want to make it easy for people to access services. We don't want people to have to repeat their story. Couple big things coming up is it's not totally out there, but we do have a new space for our thrift store. Coming in the new year.
Exciting.
So we had to move, so we're very excited to have that coming in the new year.
Good. More to come.
Yeah, and it's great because all the revenue goes directly back into our programs and services. So it's a huge support.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we'll see what the strategic planning looks like.
Awesome. So what's as we wrap up, what's the one thing you'd want if people are listening? The one thing you want to leave them with? What's the one piece that you would hope that they get out of this discussion?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, really making sure that we're creating safe spaces for people to talk about domestic abuse. But also, I will just quickly touch on one of the other questions we get is, how do you respond to a disclosure? Believe, ask them what they want you to do with the information. Be ready for it to be nothing. and listen. And there's a couple other things with that, is that you don't know if this is the first time they've ever had the courage to talk about it. And we need to make sure that we are creating an opportunity. If the answer is nothing, I don't want you to do anything, is for them to feel comfortable asking again. And maybe next time they'll be able to access services.
Right.
The other big thing is when you hear the disclosure, watch your voice. Because as soon as that little, when you talk and it goes up at the end, it's a question. So when you're responding to somebody, make sure that you don't go up at the end, because you're already questioning them, and they may not feel believed.
Right.
But they should be.
That's interesting. I would never even think that. And you just do it subconsciously, just to you need to stop yourself from questioning. Interesting. That's interesting. Those are very good feedback. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today and all the incredible work. Awesome that you guys provide. And I know it's not easy work that you do. So thank you and I know you have an amazing team as well, and all the program dedication you guys to make a positive impact. To anyone listening, if you want to learn more, go to KelownaWomenShelter.com. We do have a 24-hour helpline. We'll put it into the notes, but for anyone's interested, it's 250-763-1040. Or if you want to text, it's 236-970-0704. And we'll put them in the show notes too if people was interested in doing it as well. So thank you so much again for coming in.
Well, thank you for inviting and having the opportunity to talk about this issue. So thank you.
Thank you to ATB Wealth for sponsoring a community spotlight for us in order to do this. And we'll be back soon with more stories about people and organizations that make a difference in our community. Until next time, take care and remember that even just small actions lead to big change. So thank you for tuning in.